There's something Gina was speaking about that I heard as an invitation to consider that the colonial is the quest for the categorical, right? What the colonial does is to try to reduce tensions and intensities into a stable, neat snapshot of an identity. And that's what coloniality does. It thinks in binaries. But our bodies do not think in binaries. Our bodies think in the lowercase, not the uppercase, right? Our bodies are constantly fluid, moving through the world. I want to invite us to do something to memorialize and mark this moment. I want to also say that the opposite of trans isn't straight, okay? The opposite of trans isn't straight. Trans is the disruption of binaries altogether, right? It's not like, here, I'm trans and I'm straight. That's the proliferation of what modernity knows how to do best. And that's not what we're about here now. We're about to notice that our bodies are fluid becomings. Our bodies are fugitive. Our bodies are transgressions of binaries. In the ritual, in the spirit of that idea that we are moving and we're never quite captured, as we often think we are, I'd like everyone to stand to their feet. If you can stand to your feet. If you can stand to your feet, please stand to your feet. I was introduced just now by the voice of God. Where's my brother? Voice of God. Could you just, yeah. I'm sorry about what I said to you. Just before we were doing some testing, and I told him, well, you're not Morgan Freeman yet. And there's still some way to go. But I'd like you, brother, to announce, to invite everyone to go around and hug in the voice of God mode, okay? You're not doing it as yourself, your voice of God, okay? All right. Scene, okay? So you're inviting everyone to go hug someone else, right? To practicalize and ritualize the idea that you are not completely yourself all by yourself. We need and we breathe through each other. That is the most emancipatory, liberatory thesis that could upset white modernity. That we live through each other. So, brother, it's your turn, okay? Voice of God, okay?
And now, I invite you all to hug someone else.
There's always someone to hug. Just look. Voice of God, could you tell everyone to stop now?
Please take your
I have
seats.
just this amount of time, okay? All righty then. Thank you. How did that feel, people? Good? Yeah, do it. Thank you for being playful and for being game for those explorations of the porous, the yet to come. My name is Bayo. You might have heard of me before. I was in Aspen last year. And it has been wonderful to come back this time, especially in this week. This week has been politically, cosmically consequential, right? Right? If you know what I'm talking about, just raise your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care. Really consequential. Monday was the hottest day of the unrecorded history. Monday, just Monday, was the hottest day in recorded history, according to people who study that kind of stuff. I was landing in Aspen on the 21st, so that was Sunday, a day before. And we landed in Aspen I put on my phone, as it seemed everyone else did the same, and I saw, I'm not a Twitter, what's it called now, X, right? I'm not an Twitter guy, I don't post, but it seems to be a consequential source of news these days. So I went to Twitter/X, and there was this huge seismic news. You know what I'm talking about, right? We can all say it together. The Nigerian, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. What I know, they should have told you about me by now. The Nigerian youth are gathering to protest bad governance on August 1st. Okay? Which is fascinating news, right? If you know anything about what's happening on the continent of Africa, you might understand that the continent is sitting on a powder keg right now. Kenya is explosive, right? And the youth in Kenya have inspired protests in Uganda and in Ghana and in Nigeria. It seems everywhere there are conversations about bad governance and a desire for more, right? I scrolled very quickly to see what I passed. I scrolled past news about unidentified aerial phenomenon, and news about who's the best rapper, and news about some president refusing to or deciding not to run for a second term. But I passed all this marginal stuff behind, and I got to this news. Very, very fascinating stories about what might yet be. I get it, okay? I went to the second seemingly important news about President Biden and his decision not to run for a second term, to stop and end his campaign. And of course, I understand there was this huge eruption of energy and excitement that I feel most of us are feeling in this room, right? I think reports are that Kamala Harris broke the funding record, the 24-hour funding record, to the tune of how much, people? 100 million? Was it 100 million? I heard it was 81 million, so just a few private jets down the line. So 81 million, 100 million, she broke it. And everyone is excited, right? There's funding goals broken. People are galvanized. They're like breathing air again. And everyone is saying, yes, finally we get to stop the imperial march of fascism. And we can end it in its tracks. And maybe that's why we're here. It's this premise that light might win. If we only give it a little bit of illumination, if we stay with the light, we might win. We might end darkness. That's the very stuff of this, the thesis of this gathering. It's Martin Luther King. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. But you see, my mind is trained to be suspicious of victory, to be a little bit hesitant about claims to exclusivity or to arrival or to stability or to settlement. I've been called different names. I'm a public intellectual. I've been called different kind of names about the kinds of things that I think about. But you see, that doesn't faze me because I feel my vocation is the vocation of the trickster. And I think along the archetype of the trickster. I think with the trickster. And so I started to think about the protests and these eruptions of joy and victory and proclamations of arrival, and wonder what that obscures. I wonder what that elides. Wonder what is lost in our declarations of arrival. And so I want to say this about that whole thing that is still happening right now, and which we all learn as a story. We're learned and trained to think about it as the hero's journey. Does anyone know here the hero's journey, the myth of the hero's journey? If you've watched any Disney flick, including Nemo, right? What's that one again called? Finding Nemo. Hey, Dart. If you've watched that one, if you watched anything, if you watched Lord of the Rings, the story stands true. A hero is called out from trouble, and then the hero descends into darkness and defeats a monster. There's always a conveniently located monster just at the tip of the hero's blade, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry, I came late. Okay, this is the point where you kill me. And the hero kills the monster, and the hero comes out with a lesson, with victory, and announces his arrival. And that's how we think about the world. It's the myth of the hero's journey. I've been thinking about the monster's journey lately. And all the carcasses of monsters that have made ecologies for the victories of heroes. But more importantly, I want to say this, with great respect to Martin Luther King, to the great Martin Luther King, it seems if we stay with a careful consideration of history, with the way that the world upsets binary formulations, then it's not quite the case that light chases out darkness. There seems to be something queer here. And I want to tell you this story. It's a quick story. It happened in 1818. I'm a history kind of guy. I'm also a diva, but I'm a nerd kind of diva. You know, the one that's boring, you know. But I'm a nerd, and nerds are divas in their own right. Nerd life matters, you know. Okay, so in 1818, all right, in 1818, I think it was in 1815 that a certain conqueror was conquered, and the royalists were in retreat. The French Academy of Sciences put out this call for a competition. There was a competition. And if you had some brilliant thesis about how physics works, about how the world works, you could submit a paper. There was this young man called Augustin Fresnel. And Fresnel had an idea that was not too popular. To physicists in the house, I'm just a psychologist, so don't beat me up on the details, okay? And I'm a recovering psychologist at that. So Fresnel had an idea, and the idea was this, that if we actually take a good look at light, it doesn't behave like particles. You see, the huge contest was between people who thought that light was just a bunch of particulate matter, right? Anytime you put on the light, it streams forth this burst of particles and ball-like things, right? So light is corpuscular, it's particulate. The other end of the spectrum, so to speak, was, you know, Fresnel and some others, Christopher Huygens, that felt, no, light is a wave. Light is not corpuscular, it's a wave, you see. Of course, the people who felt that light was particulate were winning the argument. They were the establishment. Fresnel felt he had a way to prove once and for all that light behaves more like waves. And so he wrote this beautiful thesis, and he took it to his mentor. His mentor's name was Arago, Francois Arago. And Arago believed that light was particulate, but he loved his student. And so he encouraged him and said, do something about this. Submit this paper to the academy. Let's see what happens. And so they took this paper and they took it to a panel. Has anyone here presented before a PhD panel? Okay. Are you recovering from this experience? I've sat in panels before, and I've been the subject of panels, so I know how frightening it is. And Fresnel came with his paper, and all these old white men sitting there stared at Fresnel and said, this is absurd. This is irresponsible. No one thinks like this. This is horrible. You shouldn't bring this kind of stuff to a reputable Academy of Sciences like this. And then a man called Simeon Poisson, who is the subject of my story, and many stories I shall tell henceforth. In fact, I'm writing about him in my new book. Poisson said, you know what, I'm going to prove to you how absurd your story is. And so he studied the paper. And then he came back to the panel with Fresnel and said, see, look, if your story is actually true, then if we take a little ball, a perfectly spherical shape, and point a coherent source of light on it, then the shadow that it casts should have a little glimmer of light in the center of the shadow, which is horrible to think about because that's not how shadows work. Shadows are the exclusion of light. You can't have light in shadows, can you, people? I ask you, can you have light inside shadows? Anyone here? For $50,000, who can answer this question? Dar will provide the right? Not me. You're not coming to the Global South for that. Dar will provide that for $50,000. What's the answer to the question? If you point a coherent source of light at a spherical shape, the shadow will cast, the shadow that's cast will have a little ball of light. In fact, the brightest part of a shadow is its center. Is that true or not? $20,000? $10,000? I'll tell you what happened, just to get to the point. So everyone laughed it off, and it was supposed to be the end of the panel. But Arago said, you know, why not we just test it? I thought this was the whole premise of science. Let's see what happens. And so he tested it. Turns out it's true. If you cast light that way on a shape that's perfectly circular, you don't see this every day because we don't have perfectly spherical shapes around us every day. But if you cast a coherent source of light on a spherical shape, you will get a small center of light in the shadow. You know what that spot is called? Poisson spot. It's named after the person who said it was impossible. Which goes to show that even your mistakes, your greatest mistakes, could live on in your name, right? There are many other names for it. Fresnel spot, Arago spot, Poisson spot is the one that sticks with me. But whatever you name it, I think there's something of an idea here that disrupts the way we think about morality, the way I've just talked about an example from optics. But I think it extrapolates into the field of morality, how we think about ourselves. You know, we're grown into ecologies that teach us to think that, you know, to borrow from Gina, to think in binaries. It's light versus dark. It's light versus shadows. It is good versus evil. It is the hero versus the monster. We are trained to think about the world in this way, where we practice it all the time. But as a member of the Global South, I come to you with a thesis. You don't have to accept it. But that as a recipient of righteousness from the Global North, I'm tired of goodness. I'm tired of your goodness. I'm tired of your righteousness. Because it's not really working. Good people. Are you good? How many of you are good people? I mean, you don't have to answer that question. As a psychologist, I ask crazy questions. But I want you to sit with that idea. A strange idea that, yes, darkness drives out darkness. No, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. But light and darkness are stranger than we can think. That the world is stranger than those binaries that we execute. And in many senses, I think that morality, instead of just this isolated, transcendent field where preternaturally good people are in conversation with preternaturally evil people on the other side of the spectrum, we are learning that sometimes even being good can be complicit in the reinforcement of oppressive systems. That being good or being evil, sometimes, when you think about morality as a material, not just a transcendent imposition of rules that our conscience picks up in the air. If you think about morality as a field that stretches, that it can be exhausted sometimes, then sometimes Even light can be a burning sunlight that can have fascist effects. There's this beautiful proverb that says, light all the time gives birth to a desert. There's something about our predisposition to seeing the world in those neat categoricities that obscures the other ways that we're being invited to act and be intentional. Let me just speak about that a little more. I feel that as a species, gestating in nation-state systems, we are stuck. There's a lot of things we want to address, and I think many of those reasons are why we're here today, why we've traveled all the way to Aspen to have these conversations. There are many things we want to address: climate change, racial injustice, pandemics, the decline of trust in democratic institutions. We all want to solve these problems. Many of you, for instance, and I give these examples all the time, many of you are very, very careful about how you throw away your trash. I've just become the W.E.B. Du Bois Scholar in Residence at the Schumacher Center for New Economics, also taking up a visiting professorship at Clark University. I'm now living in the United States for a couple of months. My Americanisms are increasing. I hike now. And when I hike, I tell people on the way down from hiking that it's worth it. So the other day I told people, I was speaking online and I uttered the word soccer. I apologize to everyone else that knows that it's football, not soccer. But we're having a blast. That was just a digression. But we have also learned the rituals of discarding waste. And sometimes my family and I, we do it with a chuckle. We do it with a glint in our eyes because we kind of know where this discarded material is heading. We know where it's heading. It's not going to a green emerald city, a place called Away, which is the most fastidious myth of modernity, that there is a land called Away, and you can just throw things there. I grew up in Away, if I'm to put that mildly. I grew up in Nigeria, and a little bit of Away was in our playgrounds, right? And we navigated those fields where we saw the subsidized righteousness of the global north spilling into our homes. And it's not that we condemned the people in the north. It was that we kind of understood that there was nothing else to do. What do you do with your trash? You throw it away. It's just that Away often looks like where I come from. Millions and millions of tons of plastic are often tossed to Ghana, for instance, under the name of fashion sustainability, right? 15 million pieces of discardable material goes to Ghana and becomes this sweltering heap of righteousness that the people in Ghana don't know what to do with, right? And it becomes illegally dumped. But do you stop throwing your trash because of that? No, there's nothing else you can do. You're caught in a moral order that has an imperative that that's the only way you can act. You act with the major, with the categorical. We need to save the planet. It's just that the planet is a lot bigger than you think, right? Including our politics. It's wilder, more promiscuous than your accounts of arrival and victory. I heard a story of a man called Eben Harlow. Eben Harlow is a South African military contractor. He works with governments in this paramilitary arrangement to supply soldiers to governments in Africa. And he's a pioneer in this field. One time, during the Boko Haram crisis, everyone remembers that, bring back our girls, right? 200 and something girls, 270 something girls were kidnapped in the middle of the night and were lost, and the whole world in a moment of hallelujah, just said, no, we will not have this. You bring back our girls. Everyone remembers Michelle Obama holding that sign, right, in the White House, bring back our girls. Ibn Halo was the spear of this righteous action, right? So he was commissioned to help Nigeria to do this. So he came with his men, and he trained our men, and they went out to look for Boko Haram, the terrorist group. And they went and they trained, and it was like a movie, and they did all of that, and they were just about to get to the act when Ibn Halo received a phone call. And he confessed this on Al Jazeera. And Ibn Halo said, I received a call from a government saying that we should stop with the efforts to retrieve the girls because it was politically inconvenient to do so. You see, this state government was in cahoots with the government to come in the Nigerian elections. They wanted a new kind of government, and they felt it might be giving too much political currency to the government in place, the incumbent government, if they found the girls. So they called and said, cease, stop this. And when this journalist asked Ibn Halo, who's an old man, who did this? He said the United States. As you already kind of suspected, this wasn't a plot twist. It wasn't a plot twist of any kind. Now, this is not a demonization or pathologization. It's an invitation to be suspicious along with me and the trickster archetypes that are already in this room, that sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is the crisis. The righteousness, our notions of getting by or defeating the other, might just be how the system, the ecology, reinforces its hold, its stranglehold on our bodies. That morality is an ecology, and it contains hate as well. Trying to get rid of people who hate, the others who hate, so that we can be the shining light of love might be exactly how hate thrives. So instead of thinking about morality as something that is domiciled within human breasts and chests, it's an invitation to consider that we are not all that. We're not well put together either. To live in an entangled world is to appreciate that the world extends beyond and exceeds our notions of correctness. Is this a way of saying political difference doesn't matter? Obviously, it matters until it stops mattering in the way that we expect it to. One of the very hard lessons of African governments was realizing that when we chased away, which was a thing to do, I would have done the same thing. When we chased away our colonizers, we turned around and we saw that in our victory, we had become the people we chased away. We were stuck within the systems that we tried to get rid of. We chased them away and we said, yes, and we turned around and we saw a flag, a constitution, and comorbid relations with the IMF. And so we're stuck in our notions of victory and freedom that seem no longer to serve our best interests. So I'm here to speak not to you to dialogue even further. I'm not here to tell you, let's dialogue even more, because there's something very neurotypical about dialogue. About just let's sit down and we can trash it out together. I don't trust that process. I don't trust that too much. Okay, I've had, well, maybe another keynote or another talk would have me speaking about my work in the psychotherapy. But healing, emancipation doesn't come from the front. It comes from the sides. It comes from the places we're not expecting. It comes from autistic cartographies, where we stray away from the ways we're trained to move forward. I'm trying to say freedom isn't forward, it's awkward. It's not down the highway, it's off the highway. The highway no longer leads to places that are interesting. So if our politics is exclusively about defeating the other side, I fear that we will become the other side by and by. Because if you lean on a wall a long time, you become a wall. Our work is not to work through exits. or to champion new buildings. Because even walls talk in Creole. Walls are not as stable as we think they are. Walls are migrant. Binaries are migrant. The world is too promiscuous to sit still in our notions of settlement. So in the idea, in the spirit of fugitivity, I invite you to know what our bodies already sense, our bones already sense, our ancestors already sense. If we are to find new ways of being alive in the world, we need a different kind of politics. We need a different notion of leadership. It can't be the man in the front any longer. It can't be the one who's walking, on the highway. We need a notion of leadership that breaks away from the highway. We need experiment. We need a carnival. We need dance. We need a diva. I can't do that voguing thing, but yes, voguing is philosophy. We need a notion of agency and accountability and responsibility that doesn't sit squarely within white modernity. And as I said last year, I will say it again right now. Whiteness is not white people. I have to say this over and over again because I face a tide of a torrential, wave of imaginations that reduce whiteness to white people. Whiteness is not white people. Nigeria is the whitest nation on earth. It's 200 million black people caught up in white imaginaries about progress and time. We're constantly saying we need to catch up with New York. We need to look like London. We are white in that sense. And if whiteness is a part of the Anthropocene, if whiteness is a moral order, if whiteness is a political form of capture and captivity, then we need something different. And we cannot repeat the thesis of white modernity if we are to address decoloniality. So how do we decolonize? That's the question. We come to the summit of my talk, and I announce to you that I don't know. I don't know. I have no clue how we do this. I have no clue. But that's the point. If I had a clue, it might just be modernity repeating its thesis in my view of the future. I think the world is constantly inviting us to play. If I had a genie and a bottle or whatever genies come from, and I rubbed it, I would wish to know how to play again, like my children know how to do. Because play is the refusal of the world to be still. Play is always decolonial. Play is the refusal of standardization. If our politics does not resemble play, then we might be refusing the emancipatory gifts of our time. My son knows that a chair is a spaceship. He knows, he's not pretending, he knows that things are not just things, that they're relationships, that they're practices. He knows what Gina was talking about a while ago, that bodies cannot be categorical. Bodies are written in the lower case, not in the uppercase. Bodies are not categorical. Bodies spill. Bodies experiment. Read about virtual particles if you want to learn that boundaries are life-making events and death-making events. So my people, let's travel with the monstrous. Don't think about the monster as the evil, the Disney-esque horned beast that gets in the way and evokes repulsion. Think about the monster as how our cultures have always understood transformation. The monster is the thing that shows up and refuses our claims to finality. The monster is the world's way of saying there's still something else to do that you don't know anything about. You think you're final? You think you're done and fine and cool? No, there's something else. There's a fluidity that you know nothing about. How about you stay with the premise of the monstrous? If our politics was not just about inclusion is a form of violence too, right? Dragging people into gentrified spaces where they can be legible, it's fine, we need that, but it's still a form of violence. Is there something else? Darkness, light, and the other. Is there a Rumian field beyond wrongdoings and right doings? You all know Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet. Is there a field beyond good and evil, light and shadow, that we're all being called to? If there is, then I want to see you there. I want to play with you there, and dance with you there, and possibly vogue with you there. I just know that I'll meet you there.